Ida for refusing to pay for my nephew's college education after setting clear conditions? I married into wealth a few years ago, a reality that still felt somewhat surreal despite the passing of time. I came from modest beginnings, where money was always a careful balancing act, a series of sacrifices and compromises. Growing up, my parents stretched every dollar, and while we were never destitute, extravagance was an unknown concept. My husband, however, came from a world I had only seen in movies, a world of polished elegance, effortless luxury, and financial security that extended beyond lifetimes. He ran a thriving business, one that had cemented our comfortable lifestyle, ensuring that we never had to worry about things like bills, debts, or financial constraints. A sizable bank account meant that our life was one of opportunity, but I never wanted to become the type of person who lost touch with reality, who forgot where they came from. That was why, when my sister's financial struggles became more pronounced, I felt a deep sense of sympathy. My sister, older by nearly a decade, had always been fiercely independent. She had raised Jake, her only son, on her own since he was a baby. I remembered the countless nights she had spent working extra shifts, the exhaustion in her voice, the unwavering determination in her eyes. She had fought for everything they had, and I respected her immensely for it. But no amount of hard work had ever been able to change the fundamental reality of their financial situation. Single motherhood came with relentless burdens, and while she had done her best, there were limitations to what she could provide. Jake had always been a bright, ambitious kid. From the time he was young, he had talked about wanting to be a doctor. It was a dream that required years of study, dedication, and, most of all, money. The cost of medical school was astronomical, but even just getting through an undergraduate degree required resources my sister simply didn't have. It was clear that, without financial aid, scholarships, or an external benefactor, Jake's dreams would remain just that, dreams. I had been considering helping for some time before I finally brought it up with my husband. The idea of paying for Jake's education seemed like the right thing to do. We had more money than we could possibly spend in a lifetime, and with no children of our own, there was no reason not to extend a helping hand. My husband, pragmatic and level-headed, listened as I explained my concerns. He agreed almost immediately, seeing no harm in the idea. It wasn't charity, it was family. But there was something that weighed on me, an unease I couldn't quite shake. I didn't want to simply write a check. Money, when handed out without expectations, had a way of losing its value. I had seen it before: people who came into wealth too easily, who took it for granted, who saw it as an entitlement rather than an opportunity. I didn't want that for Jake. I wanted him to appreciate what was being given, to understand that financial support was not just a safety net but an investment in his own future. He needed to demonstrate commitment, to show that he was willing to put in the effort required to succeed. That was why I had conditions. They weren't outrageous or impossible, but they were essential. I needed to see that he was serious, that he understood the gravity of what he was asking. The first condition was that he work part-time. It didn't have to be anything excessive, 20 hours a week, enough to show that he was willing to contribute to his own education. Hard work built character, and I wanted him to develop a sense of responsibility. The second condition was community service. 80 hours a year, a small but meaningful commitment. I had been volunteering at a local food pantry for years, and I had even offered him the chance to join me. Giving back to the community was important, a reminder that success should be accompanied by a sense of responsibility toward others. The third condition was academic. A minimum grade average of 75. If he was going to pursue higher education, especially in something as demanding as medicine, he needed to demonstrate that he was capable of keeping up. I sat my sister down and explained my offer in detail. I could see the relief in her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged just slightly as if an enormous weight had been lifted. But I also saw hesitation. She didn't argue at first, only nodded along as I outlined the conditions, though there was a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. When I spoke to Jake, He seemed eager, assuring me that he understood and that he was grateful for the opportunity. He promised he would do what was needed, that he wouldn't let me down. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he would take this seriously, that he would rise to the occasion, that he would prove not just to me but to himself that he was capable of meeting expectations. I had made the offer with good intentions, but deep down, I knew that the true test was yet to come. I didn't think the conditions I set were unreasonable. In fact, they felt like the bare minimum for someone embarking on a journey towards such a prestigious and demanding career. Becoming a doctor required discipline, commitment, and an unwavering sense of responsibility. How could I justify funding such an expensive education if Jake wasn't demonstrating these qualities now? From the beginning, I made sure that everyone involved understood the terms clearly. I explained it to Jake, emphasizing that this was an opportunity, not a handout. My sister listened, nodding at the appropriate moments, but I sensed an undercurrent of doubt. Perhaps she believed that I would relent, that when the time came, I would hand over the money regardless of Jake's effort. But my husband supported me without hesitation. He had always believed in accountability, in the notion that success required more than just financial backing, it required character. We had no children of our own, no tuition fees looming in our future, so helping Jake felt like the right thing to do, provided he met the simple requirements. As the application deadlines approached, however, reality settled in like a storm cloud darkening the horizon. The progress reports came in, each one a stark reminder that my conditions were not being met. His GPA lingered stubbornly at 72, just below the minimum I had set. It wasn't that I expected perfection. 75 was not an unachievable goal. But it signified effort, a willingness to engage with his studies in a meaningful way. Every time I glanced at the numbers, I saw more than grades. I saw a lack of commitment. His part-time job, which was supposed to instill a sense of financial responsibility, had become an afterthought. 10 hours a week, half of what we had agreed upon, a meager contribution that barely skimmed the surface of responsibility. His employer, a small cafe owner I knew personally, mentioned casually one day that Jake often seemed distracted, his shifts marked by more time spent on his phone than on actual work. And the community service, the cornerstone of my attempt to teach him empathy and the importance of giving back, remained an untouched promise. The food pantry where I volunteered, bustling with activity, had a place reserved for him, a space where he could witness firsthand the struggles of those less fortunate. But he never showed up. The clipboard with his name remained empty, week after week, a glaring reminder of promises unfulfilled. I tried talking to him, sitting down at the kitchen table, my voice calm but firm, a blend of concern and disappointment. He listened, nodded dutifully, his face a mask of youthful indifference. His responses were a tapestry of well-rehearsed excuses. School was harder than he expected, his job was tiring, and weekends were his only time to relax. But with each conversation, it became evident that his words were hollow, a performance rather than a pledge. As the days turned into weeks, my frustration grew, a creeping resentment that twisted in my stomach. I watched as Jake continued his routines, unchanged and unbothered, as if the conditions were merely suggestions, easily ignored. My sister, caught between maternal instinct and familial obligation, began to push back subtly. Her texts became more frequent, her tone shifting from gratitude to gentle reprimand. "He's trying his best," she would insist, her words laced with an unspoken plea for leniency. "School is stressful for him, and this is all new territory." I understood her position, the fierce protectiveness of a mother who had spent years shielding her child from the harsher realities of life. But I also understood that shielding him now would only do more harm than good. What kind of aunt would I be if I allowed him to squander an opportunity without any consequence? What kind of person would I be if I invested in someone unwilling to invest in themselves? Still, doubt not at me. Was I being too rigid, too unyielding in my expectations? After all, my life had become a cascade of privileges since marrying my husband, a life far removed from the struggles my sister and Jake faced daily. Was I disconnected from the realities of their world, imposing standards they could never hope to meet? My husband remained my anchor during these turbulent times. His pragmatic view was unchanging. Help was a privilege, not a right. If he can't meet these conditions now, he would say, his voice a blend of calm and conviction, how do you expect him to handle the demands of medical school? The calendar pages turned, each day bringing us closer to the deadline. I continued to check in, offering gentle reminders that were met with vague reassurances and promises to do better. But promises were not actions, and intentions were not results. The unwavering truth was that Jake had not met any of the criteria, and now I was faced with a choice that tested not only my integrity but my relationship with my family. Each unfulfilled requirement was a chisel, slowly carving away the foundation of my offer. The part-time job that was meant to teach him financial responsibility was neglected, the community service that was supposed to broaden his worldview was ignored, and the grades that needed to reflect his academic dedication were mediocre at best. The very framework of support I had constructed was crumbling, weakened by apathy and inaction. The day of decision loomed, an ominous presence that filled the house with a silent tension. I knew what had to be done, even as it pained me. My sister's texts had escalated from reminders to outright pleas, her words punctuated with accusations of cruelty and abandonment. She was furious, convinced that I was punishing Jake for being less than perfect, that my financial support was a manipulative tactic rather than a genuine offer of help. But this wasn't about perfection. It was about effort, about taking the steps necessary to shape one's future. Jake's dream of becoming a doctor required more than wishful thinking. It required the discipline to rise above challenges, the perseverance to keep pushing forward even when the path was difficult. In the end, it wasn't my conditions that failed Jake, it was his inability to see their value. It was his failure to recognize that opportunities come with responsibilities, that support is not a handout but a partnership. The moment of truth had arrived, and as much as I dreaded the fallout, I knew that caving in would only serve to undermine the very lessons I was trying to impart. The storm was about to break, and I had to stand firm, even if it meant facing the wrath of those I loved. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew there would be no turning back. I had given Jake every chance to meet my conditions, and he had failed. No more gentle reminders, no more second chances. The deadline had arrived, and my decision was final. My sister's reaction was immediate, her voice sharp with disbelief and outrage. I could hear the anger rising, bubbling beneath the surface, her breath coming faster as she processed what I had just told her. "Are you serious?" she snapped, her voice trembling. "You're really going to do this? You're going to let Jake's future crumble over a couple of hours of work and a few missing grades?" I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "It's not about a couple of hours or a few missing grades," I said, keeping my tone steady. "It's about responsibility. It's about effort." I made my expectations clear, and Jake didn't meet them. I can't just throw money at him and hope he magically becomes a responsible adult once he sets foot on campus. But she wasn't listening. "You're being too harsh," she yelled. "He's 18. He's still a kid. You're expecting him to act like some perfect little adult just because you're dangling this opportunity in front of him. Do you even care about his future, or are you just trying to prove a point?" I closed my eyes for a moment, suppressing the wave of frustration building inside me. She didn't understand. Or maybe she refused to. "I do care," I said, more firmly now. "That's why I set conditions in the first place. I wanted him to take ownership of his education. I wanted him to show that he was serious about his future. If I pay for college now, without any effort on his part, what happens next? Will he take his classes seriously? Will he push himself to succeed, or will he assume I'll always be there to bail him out?" She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "So, what? You're teaching him a lesson? That's what this is about? You want to make him suffer to prove some kind of point about hard work? My patience was wearing thin. It's not about suffering, I said. It's about understanding the value of what he's being given. I worked for everything I have. Even after marrying into money, I never stopped working, never stopped being responsible for my own success. I want Jake to learn that, too. She scoffed. That's easy for you to say. You live in a house that costs more than I'll make in a lifetime. You never have to worry about money. You'll never have to scrape by to put food on the table or wonder if you will make rent next month. You don't get it. And there it was. The resentment. The unspoken tension that had always lingered between us since my marriage. Just because I'm financially stable now doesn't mean I've forgotten what it's like to struggle, I said coldly. I remember plenty of nights growing up when our parents had to choose between paying the electric bill and putting groceries in the fridge. I remember what it was like watching you work yourself to the bone for Jake. That's exactly why I don't want him to waste this opportunity. But she was shaking her head, already dismissing my words. No. You just want control. You want to hold this financial carrot over his head like some kind of test. And when he doesn't jump high enough, you pull it away. That's manipulation, not generosity. I clenched my fists at my sides, forcing myself to stay composed. If you really think that, I said, my voice low, then maybe you never understood my intentions in the first place. A heavy silence stretched between us, thick with anger, hurt, and years of unspoken resentment. Then, finally, she exhaled sharply. Fine, she muttered. If that's how it's going to be, then fine. But don't expect me to forget this. And don't expect Jake to, either. With that, she hung up, leaving nothing but static on the other end. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. Had I done the right thing? I replayed every moment of the past year, every conversation with Jake, every attempt to push him toward meeting the conditions. I had wanted to help him. I had wanted to see him succeed. But time and time again, he had fallen short not because he was incapable, but because he had chosen not to try. Could I really justify paying for college under those circumstances? My husband found me sitting in the kitchen later that evening, my untouched cup of coffee long since gone cold. She didn't take it well, did she? He asked, sliding into the seat across from me. I shook my head. She thinks I'm being cruel. That I'm punishing him for not being perfect. He leaned back, thoughtful. You're not punishing him, he said. You gave him a goal. He didn't reach it. Actions have consequences. If he wants to go to college, there are other ways. Scholarships. Grants. Student loans. It's not the end of the world. I sighed. She says he's just a kid. That I'm expecting too much. My husband gave me a pointed look. 18 is old enough to take responsibility for your future. You know that better than anyone. He wasn't wrong. At 18, I had been working nearly full-time while juggling school. I had struggled, sacrificed, clawed my way toward every opportunity I had. And even now, with wealth and security, I had never let myself forget what it took to get here. So why did I feel so guilty? Maybe because it wasn't just about Jake. It was about my sister, about the widening chasm between us, about the resentment that had been brewing beneath the surface for years. I had thought that helping Jake would bring us closer. Instead, it had driven a wedge between us. The next few weeks were tense. My sister barely spoke to me. When she did, it was short, clipped responses, civil, but cold. Jake avoided me entirely. I heard through the grapevine that he had applied for student loans, that my sister had picked up extra shifts to try and help cover costs. A part of me wanted to reach out, to tell her that my offer was still there if Jake showed even a fraction of the effort I had asked for. But I knew it was pointless. The damage had been done. And yet, I still held my ground. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about money. This was about principle. And whether my sister ever forgave me or not, I knew one thing for certain. I had done the right thing. The barrage of messages didn't stop. Every few hours, my phone would light up with another text from my sister, the words dripping with anger, disappointment, and an ever-growing desperation. At first, I read each one, trying to see if there was a way to respond, a way to make her understand. But as the days passed, they all started blending into one relentless stream of blame. I hope you're happy watching your own nephew struggle. This isn't about responsibility, it's about control. If mom and dad were still around, they'd be ashamed of you. That last one stung more than I cared to admit. I didn't reply. What was there to say? I had made my stance clear. Jake had been given an opportunity, not just a financial gift, but a chance to prove to himself that he was ready for adulthood. And he had let it slip away. The silence between us grew. Calls went unanswered. Family group chats became battlegrounds, my sister posting vague, bitter remarks that were clearly directed at me, while other relatives stayed cautiously neutral. Some offered quiet support in private messages. You did the right thing. He needs to learn. Others urged me to reconsider. It's just money. Why let it tear the family apart? But it wasn't just money. It was principle. A month passed. Then two. Jake had enrolled in a local community college, taking out student loans to cover tuition while working part-time. My sister, exhausted and stretched thin, picked up even more shifts, trying to ease his financial burden. And then, one evening, I got a call I never expected. Jake. For a moment, I just stared at his name on the screen, a strange mix of relief and apprehension settling in my chest. Was he calling to lash out at me, to demand answers, to tell me how much he resented me for refusing to pay? I answered. His voice was quiet. Hey, Auntie. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding escaped. Hey, Jake. A pause. Then, can I talk to you? Of course. For the first time in months, he spoke to me not through his mother's anger, not through the lens of resentment, but as himself. He told me how hard it had been, how juggling work and school had nearly broken him at first, how he had cursed my name under his breath every time he had to clock in after a long day of classes. But I get it now, he admitted. At least, I think I do. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't resentful. It was just tired. When you first told me your conditions, he continued, I thought you were just being difficult. Like, making me jump through hoops just because you could. But now, I don't know. I guess I never really thought about what it meant to work for something. To actually earn it. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. I'm not gonna lie, he added, a small, self-deprecating laugh in his tone. It sucks. But my grades are better now than they were in high school. I'm paying attention in class because, you know, I have to. I'm making it work. I just wanted you to know that. For a moment, I couldn't find the right words. I'm proud of you, Jake, I finally said, meaning every syllable. I still think you were kind of an asshole about it, he admitted, but there was no venom in his words, only a reluctant sort of respect. I laughed. Fair enough. Another pause. Then, hesitantly, Mom still isn't talking to you. I figured, I said softly. She probably won't anytime soon, he warned. She's still pissed. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I know. A beat of silence passed between us. Then, quietly, I think she's just scared. She's been doing everything for me for so long, and now she doesn't know what to do when she can't anymore. I think that's why she got so mad at you. It wasn't just about the money. I closed my eyes. It made sense, in a painful sort of way. She'll come around eventually, he added, sounding uncertain. Maybe. Maybe. Or maybe not. But for the first time since this all started, I felt like I had done something right. Not for my sister. Not even for myself. But for Jake. And that was enough.